Why would over 41,000 people across the world, members of the public, doctors, healthcare people, call for the mRNA to be banned? This is quite a significant thing, and this is what I'll be covering today when I look at the Hope Accord. And this Hope Accord is recently been put out and it's growing in attention. And I'm just keeping you up to date to make you aware as to what's happening and critically what it is that you could be looking at to try and see if you personally are interested in signing up to what it is they're doing. Now, I'm also going to be linking this to the fact that over about a year ago, in April 2023, I had the opportunity to interview Nick Hunt. And this was again the Perseus Report. And for that time, they again wanted the COVID vaccine suspended. And you can see the full video in the link below. And I'll play a clip from it as well, just so that you are aware of what it is that he was focused on. For me at this point, even though I'm keeping you updated, where my whole attention has been focused is on the storm spike triggered autoimmune response mechanism. It's a lot of thought going into how this will present, what it will do. And critically, what I want you to do is I want you, if you are interested in the webinar, please go to the link below, register for it. We're going to be doing it this Thursday in about another 3 days. I'm tying all the presentation together. Recognize it or risk the consequences. Additionally, I want you to click on the subscribe button, which should be right here on your screen. It should look like a bell. If you're on YouTube, click on it and make sure that you subscribe. Finally, we're giving you an ebook, and this ebook is about nitric oxide and the benefit in terms of the sinuses protecting against COVID. There is a link there. We want you to subscribe so that you can be part of our Vision Med newsletter, and you'll be taken to the site. We'll keep you in contact and keep you updated. Let's get back to the business at hand. What really is this Hope Accord? And this Hope Accord has been out, I think, now for maybe even a month. I think Dr. John Campbell had discussed this as well, but I realized that just in case you weren't aware of it, it would be valuable for me to share it with you. As I said, I'm going to be sharing another bit, a short clip from the video about the Perseus Report in just a second. So here is what they are calling for. And as I said, over 41,000 people across the world have already signed up to this. And so this is the Hope Accord. And the first thing they're calling for is an immediate suspension of the mRNA vaccine products. Probably reasonable because already AstraZeneca has pulled out. Johnson & Johnson is no longer active. The Sinopharm whole virus vaccines are not used in the Western world. So the only one left is this. And their concern is that this growing body of evidence suggests that the widespread rollout of this vaccine is contributing to alarming rise in disability and excess deaths. Let me be balanced here because many people in the scientific community will argue against that. They will say there is no clear evidence and no clear link that any disability is directly connected with the vaccine. And they're right, because the research really hasn't been done. The kind of adequate, detailed analysis of the research breaking out the different groups really hasn't been done. So everybody is saying one thing, but it's very difficult to get hardcore evidence that this is occurring. All we can say is that a lot more people seem to be sick and a lot more people generally seem to be dying. But could that just be because of the COVID pandemic? That's what people would argue about. The next point that they highlighted here was that they wanted a comprehensive reevaluation of the safety and efficacy of all COVID vaccine products. Now, I think that that is a very reasonable perspective. I mean, why would anybody have an issue with that? And I think that when I think about what the response should be to that, it takes me back to the Perseus report here. And the Perseus report in 2023 was looking at that kind of concern. And I'll show you here the Perseus Report, the executive summary. This was from the UK. So they were specifically focused on the MHRA being responsible for the safety and efficacy of all medicines in the UK. And they thought that the MHRA had failed to meet its responsibilities in multiple ways. There was no requirement for manufacturers to demonstrate safety, approval for younger age groups in the absence of long-term safety data, failure to act promptly on evidence of adverse reactions, and failure to identify and address problems with manufacturing and quality control. So you have to remember, this was from April 2023. So this was like over a year ago that this call had been going out. And there is one image that they showed that really stood out to me that I'll show you as well. And this was why they were so adamant about it, is that at the time, they had compared multiple different vaccines. And so they are looking at all measles vaccines, which is like 673 million doses had been given. Total adverse reactions about 50,000. All the polio vaccines, similar amount, only about 9,000 adverse events. All the influenza vaccines every year it's been given, only about 44,600 events. And looking at this, 341 million doses given at the time. And they were looking, compared to this, is half the amount of all measles and all polio, but it was 1.8 million adverse effects that they had gotten in terms of their numbers. This was standout in terms of the difference. Now, some people may say it was worth it in the context of a pandemic, but that's relative. And you have to then ask whether or not it was the most appropriate thing to do in all of the specific age groups that were involved. So that's the kind of question that needed to be asked. And that was what the Perseus Report was asking from last year in April 2023. And I've got here a short, it really brings to question one of the interesting parts of the pandemic is that there has been this talk about who is an expert in the COVID-19 pandemic. We're now 3 years down the line, and we've had the people who should be the experts, should be leading the way, and we are not out of the pandemic. Are they still the experts?
Well, I'd probably answer that from another direction. Suppose, not everything in the report is 100% correct. We're confident it is, but suppose somebody thinks it isn't. But at the very least, it's generated, and they are listed in the report and on the website, perseus.org.uk, a whole list of questions that really parliamentarians, policymakers, and the media ought to be asking. There's enough weight of evidence there to ring alarm bells. We're very confident in, and that's why we've gone to the lengths of sending it to all MPs and Lords, peers in the UK, and to key figures who you've referred to as experts. June Rain, the head of the MHRA, and other experts who've had something to do with the rollout of the COVID vaccine. We're confident in its contents and the questions that arise from it, which should be asked.
And so you think the questions are big enough at the moment that they should actually suspend the vaccine rollout or the use of it until they have clarified it? Or would you say that the pandemic and the risk to lives from the infection supersede?
No, I think stronger than what you've just said. I think I don't think it's a question of pausing and clarifying. I think there's a fundamental problem with the safety management of these vaccines. It's not just what I think, it's what the report concludes. It needs a proper inquiry into MHRA's regulation and safety management, not just the COVID vaccines, incidentally. Everything, I mean, there's a section in the report on best practice safety management, which MHRA don't follow, which applies to their regulation of all medicines. I personally have lost complete faith in the safety of all medicines.
Wow.
And to put it bluntly, if they haven't been in use for let's say 5 years, I'd be really wary. And if it wasn't a life-saving situation, I would, you know.
So you can see this was from April 2023 that this discussion was happening. So this is not new. And we are now in July 2024. So this is almost 15 months after they were calling for this. And you can see now the correlation with what is happening with the Hope Accord. Very similar situation, very similar calls. As I said, they are as well calling for the immediate suspension. They are calling as well for comprehensive reevaluation of the safety and efficacy of all the products. Very reasonable. I don't see any problems with that. Now, this one here, immediate recognition and support for the vaccine injured. This is a biggie because there are a lot of people who went along with the narrative, who were trying to do the right thing, follow the science, and then they got injured. And instead of a recognition of these injuries and an investigation into the cause and to the mechanism, largely they were ignored and their injuries were pretended as if it didn't happen. It wasn't connected. It was terrible, the impact that it had on those people. And additionally, they were then ridiculed, sadly, by people who were against the COVID vaccine for taking it in the first place. So they were between a rock and a hard place, ridiculed by one side, ignored by another. So I think that is a very, very important aspect of the Hope Accord. And I think that humanitarian aspect of it is really, really critical to follow through. The other point that they mentioned in 4 is the restoration of ethical principles abandoned during the COVID-19 era. So, what they're saying is fundamental and cherished principles of medical ethics were disregarded on the premise of an emergency. First, do no harm, informed consent, bodily autonomy, and the notion that adults protect children, not the other way around. The precautionary principle was inverted, and also particularly concerning was the erosion of free speech. These are really important points. They touch home to me as well in the context of, certainly I experienced firsthand the censorship. I was banned for quite a while on LinkedIn. I have had a number of videos taken down and been censored on YouTube, all for asking scientific questions. Now, some people may not like the questions because they are concerned about hesitancy. But in the context of informed consent, if you can't answer the concerns of the general public, you don't have informed consent, even if you perceive what they're concerned about is misinformation. You still have to answer concerns and be able to answer scientific challenge. So, one of the greatest, saddest parts of the pandemic was the fact that scientific challenge was discounted, because science always should be challenged. So, looking at point 5 here, addressing the root causes of our current predicament. And it talks about the medical profession must lead by admitting that they've lost their way. By drawing attention to these medical ethics surrounding the COVID response, we hope to validate and amplify the call to establish the relevant facts and ensure vital lessons are learned. Now, one of the things that is very clear, and based on the responses I get, especially when I look at what happens in YouTube and I see the comments and I try and get involved in them, there has been significant damage to the reputation of medicine. what's worrying is that I don't think most doctors are aware of this. They're just getting on as normal. They suspect that the public generally has accepted what happens, but there's a whole cohort of people who have lost trust in the system because of what happened. It needs to be acknowledged and it needs to be addressed because it has implications going forward. Because if you've lost the trust, what happens if something else is going on that you need people to action on quickly and they no longer trust your judgment? The implications are quite serious. And so all effort has to be made to rebuild this trust and to try and get people back on board. Back to the Hope Accord, as I said here, you can see this was 3rd of July was when it was published, and they've got quite a few medics here who are involved. You can see here at the moment there are 41,221 total supporters, of which 1,283 are medical doctors. Then they have other healthcare professionals, academics, concerned citizens, and everybody is involved. I can't specifically tell anybody as to what their view should be, but I think it's worth reflecting on what it is that they're calling for. And from my point of view, I think the critical thing is that science needs to be back at front and center in what is happening. Now, my work is primarily about trying to anticipate what's going to happen next. And this is why I'm talking about this storm, spike triggered autoimmune response mechanism. It's one thing to be worried about the continued mRNA use, but at the moment it's really low uptake. And so my bigger concern is what happens in people where there is reinfection and reactivation of some of these autoimmune responses. How will it present? What are the significant mechanisms around the disease? Is there anything we can do to identify who's affected? Is there anything we can do to treat it? And so I think that right at this point, with the high circulation of the variants going on, we are again in a very complex situation. It's one thing we can target trying to remove specific things off the market, but we really need to get our heads around how do we mitigate some of the critical damage that is occurring across the board in populations that have high circulation of virus. I'll be talking about this and I'll keep talking about this spike triggered autoimmune response mechanism. There is nothing more important. Believe me, I can tell you that it affects so many organs and people are not aware because it doesn't happen immediately. I'm talking about a 3 to 4 week lag between infection and when people can start having some of these strange patterns of disease. And they oftentimes don't even know they've been infected because the symptoms are so mild. So, this is a big issue that needs to be addressed. So, the stopping of the vaccines, difficult question, but quite frankly, it seems the public has already made that determination and people are just not taking their booster. So, they have voted with their feet. Should it be formally done? Well, we've seen what has happened with AstraZeneca. And people may say, well, it was because of the AstraZeneca platform, not necessarily because of the vaccine itself. I suspect that it's to do with the spike protein. Now, there have been different platforms, not all of them have the same outcomes, but this spike protein is such a remarkable piece of kit that I think we are going to be having challenges for health for many, many years to come. So, final point, remember the 3 things you need to do. 1, subscribe. There's a button right here. Make sure you subscribe. 2, register for the newsletter and get your free ebook. And 3, consider joining me for this webinar so that I can talk in some more detail about what I think is coming with regards to this storm. So thank you for joining me, and we will certainly keep you in touch and keep you updated with the science around COVID-19. Have a great evening.